Every group needs one. The shock absorber. The one who makes it easy. The one who keeps the energy light. You always have a joke ready for the silence. You laugh first. You laugh the loudest. Just so nobody else has to figure out what to do with their face. You are fine. Always, always, always fine. But let's be real for a second. Have you ever cracked a joke right at the exact moment you were actually the most upset? Have you ever typed lmao into a group chat, sitting completely alone, in a dark room, with completely dead eyes? If you know that feeling, if you are that person, I need you to stay with me for the next few minutes. Because there is a book written entirely about you. It was written in 1948, in Japan, by a man who was quietly drowning. And somehow, against all logic, it is the most accurate, devastating description of your particular, private exhaustion that has ever been put on paper. Osamu Dazai wrote No Longer Human in the last year of his life. He was 38 years old and had already tried to die several times. He was brilliant and broken and deeply, relentlessly unable to feel like a normal person in a normal world. And the book he left behind is narrated by a man named Oba Yozo, who from the very first pages tells you plainly that he has never understood human beings, that he watches them the way you might watch an alien species through glass, that their hunger, their anger, their casual comfort with each other, all of it is completely opaque to him. And so Yozo does what anyone does when they are terrified of being found out. He performs, he becomes the clown, the buffoon, the one everyone loves having around because he makes the room easy, and in making the room easy, he never has to show them anything real. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That sounds like a very depressing book about a very damaged man, and what does any of that have to do with me? And I hear you, but stay here, because I'm about to describe something that I think you will recognize in your bones. Think about the last time you walked into a room where the tension was high. Maybe it was a family dinner with a specific silence sitting in the middle of the table like a third guest. Maybe it was a work meeting where two people clearly had something unresolved between them and everyone else was quietly waiting for someone to break it. And something in you, automatically, without you deciding to do it, reached for the joke, the self-deprecating comment, the light redirect, the warm, easy laugh that signals to the whole room, we are okay, everything is fine, you can relax, because I will absorb this. And the room did relax, and everyone liked you a little more for it. And you drove home that night feeling hollowed out in a way you couldn't fully explain. That is Yozo. That is exactly Yozo. Dazai shows us his childhood, and it is here that the whole mechanism becomes clear. Yozo grows up in a wealthy family in rural Japan, surrounded by adults whose behavior he genuinely cannot decode. He watches them want things and hide the wanting. He watches them say one thing and mean another. He watches them hurt each other in ways that everyone politely agrees didn't happen. And he feels none of the things they seem to feel. Or maybe he feels all of it, too much of it, in a frequency they can't hear. He can't tell. All he knows is that there is a gap between himself and every other human being in the room, and that gap feels like a verdict. So he clowns, deliberately, strategically, with the careful intelligence of someone building a shelter. He trips over things on purpose. He makes grotesque faces at dinner to make his family laugh. He performs stupidity so convincingly that nobody ever has time to ask what's actually happening underneath it. And it works. They love him for it. They find him delightful. And he is completely, utterly alone. Here is the part we never say out loud. Most of us know exactly what this feels like. Not necessarily in the dramatic, literary way, not with Yozo's particular depth of alienation, but the structure of it. The specific sensation of walking into a social situation and feeling the gap between how you actually are and how you need to appear in order to be safe. The low-grade panic of imagining what would happen if the chill, easygoing, unfailingly pleasant version of you slipped for just a moment and someone saw what was actually underneath. The fear that if they saw the real thing, the unfunny, uncertain, quietly overwhelmed real thing, they would not know what to do with it. That the invitation would stop coming. that the warmth in the room would cool, that you would be, in some essential way, too much, or not enough, or simply wrong in a way that can't be fixed. And so you keep performing. You get very, very good at it. And here is where this book stops being a historical artifact and becomes something frighteningly current. Because Yozo was performing for a small village in 1930s Japan, his audience was a household, a classroom, a handful of relationships. But we have been handed an eternal stage with an infinite audience, and the lights never go off. The internet did not invent the performance, but it industrialized it. Now we curate playlists and make them public because the playlist is a character statement. We draft a post 3 times to get the tone right, to hit that specific register of effortless wit, because being try-hard is the one unforgivable social crime. We spend 40 minutes choosing which 3 photos to post from a trip so that our life looks like a thing that is happening correctly. We perform normalcy on Zoom calls with the careful lighting and the slightly too cheerful, "I'm good, how are you?" We perform relatability in our stories. We perform depth in our captions. We perform being someone who is not performing. We are all Yozo, just with more bandwidth. And the cost is the same. You do it long enough and you forget where the performance ends. You forget what you actually think about things because you've been monitoring how your opinions will land for so long that the unmonitored opinion barely exists anymore. You forget what your actual resting face looks like because you've been managing your expressions in every reflective surface for years. The mask gets heavier, and the heaviest part is not wearing it. It's that you can't remember where you put your face. If any of this is sitting in your chest in a way that feels uncomfortably familiar, if you are genuinely tired of playing a character that everyone likes but you can barely recognize, and you just want somewhere quiet to take it off for a minute, consider subscribing. This channel is for exactly that. Let's find some quiet together. There is a moment in the book that I cannot stop thinking about. A small, seemingly minor moment that Dazai has written with such precision that it functions almost like a jump scare for the soul. Yozo is in school. He has been performing the clown routine for years by now. He is good at it. Nobody has ever questioned it. And one day, during some physical activity, he performs one of his deliberate comedic falls, the kind he has engineered carefully for maximum laughs and minimum suspicion. And from across the room, a boy named Takeichi, a boy everyone considers a little slow, a bit simple, not someone whose attention matters, looks directly at Yozo and says quietly, almost to himself, "You did it on purpose." 5 words. And Yozo's entire world goes cold. Because Takeichi is right, and Yozo knows immediately, completely, in his whole body that he has been seen. Not the performance, not the carefully maintained surface. The actual architecture underneath it, the calculation, the fear, the gap. All of it, spotted by the one person Yozo had decided couldn't possibly see anything at all. And the terror that Yozo feels in that moment is not the terror of being caught doing something wrong. It is the older, deeper terror of simply being known, of having the mask slip, of the real thing being visible, finally, to someone who did not agree to see only the performance. You know that terror. Maybe not in those exact words, but you know the sensation. The moment someone asks you a question that gets too close, the moment a good friend looks at you a beat too long and says, "Are you actually okay?" And something in you floods with the impulse to immediately, reflexively, reassure them. Yes, totally fine, just tired. The laughter you deploy to make the moment pass. The way you can talk for 20 minutes about other people's problems in a conversation that started with a question about yours. The mask is so practiced that even the moments of potential relief, the moments when someone offers you a door, you close it because you don't know how to walk through it anymore. Because if you let them see, you have to know what they are looking at, and you are not entirely sure you want to find out. Dazai wrote this book at the end of a life spent in that exact particular darkness. And the book is dark. I will not pretend to you that it has a tidy ending, because it doesn't. Yozo's story ends badly, and the book holds that without flinching. But here is the thing I keep coming back to. The thing that makes me want to press this book into the hands of people who are quietly struggling in the specific way Yozo struggled. The title is No Longer Human, and Yozo uses it to describe himself as a verdict, as evidence that his alienation, his inability to feel things the way other people feel them, his exhaustion from the performance, all of it adds up to something disqualifying. Something that puts him outside the category of normal human experience. But the irony is devastating and beautiful and worth sitting with. Everything Yozo describes, every specific terror and every specific exhaustion, the fear of being truly seen, the gap between the self and the performance, the loneliness of being loved for something you constructed rather than something you are, the bone-tiredness of maintaining a face that isn't yours, all of it is among the most human things I have ever read. It is not evidence of being broken beyond repair. It is evidence of being sensitive enough to feel the full weight of what we ask of each other. The performance culture, the unspoken rule that you must always arrive managed, edited, acceptable, and pleasant. Yozo suffered under that weight more than most, but he was not alone in carrying it. He was just more honest about what it weighed. And this is where I want to hand you something carefully, the way you hand something fragile to someone you trust. You do not have to be the funny one. You do not have to arrive at every gathering having pre-prepared your easy, low-maintenance energy so that nobody has to worry about you. You do not have to crack the joke at the moment when you are most desperate to cry. You do not have to type lmao with dead eyes. You do not have to perform effortless okayness in the comments section of your own life. The alienation you feel, that specific ache of being surrounded by people who seem comfortable in ways you do not feel, is not evidence that you are uniquely defective. It is not a verdict. It is what happens when the performance demanded of us is genuinely, structurally unbearable, and a sensitive person is asked to maintain it indefinitely without rest. Yozo thought his exhaustion proved he was less than human. What it actually proved is that he was paying attention, that he felt things fully, that he could not do what so many of us have learned to do, which is numb the feeling enough to keep performing without noticing the cost. You have noticed the cost. That is not a flaw. Look, some people will tell you that the solution is to perform better, to work on your social anxiety, to build your confidence, to present yourself more strategically, to put yourself out there. And some of that is genuinely useful in its place. But I am not interested in helping you build a better mask. I am interested in something smaller and more difficult and ultimately more real than that. The possibility that you could, in certain moments, with certain people, in certain quiet spaces, just stop. Stop performing. Stop managing. Stop filling the silence with yourself so that nobody has to feel it. What is underneath the clown? Not the sad clown from a bad metaphor. The actual you. The one with a specific, unperformed opinion about things. The one who does not always have a joke ready because not everything is a joke. The one who might need a minute. Who might want to be asked a real question and given real space to answer it honestly and slowly without the laugh track. That person is not broken. That person was just asked to stay backstage for a very long time. The stage is still there. It will always be there. The internet is not going anywhere. And the social contract that says you must arrive edited will not dissolve overnight. But you do not have to be on it every moment. You are allowed to walk into the wings. You are allowed to sit in the dark and just be quiet and not performing and not managing and not funny and not easy and not anything in particular. You are allowed to be a person who is not a performance. Dazai never fully found that permission for himself. And the book he left us is, among other things, a record of what happens when someone cannot find it. But we can use it differently. We can read Yozo's exhaustion, and instead of seeing a cautionary tale about weakness, we can see a mirror held up to a very real and very human kind of suffering. And we can decide to take it seriously, to take ourselves seriously, to say quietly, without announcement, that the clown is going to take a break. Not forever, not dramatically, not in a way that requires explanation or apology. Just, for now, in this moment, stepping back from the performance, breathing without an audience, being just briefly the unedited, unfunny, uncertain, fully human version of yourself that has been patiently, quietly waiting backstage this whole time. You do not have to be no longer human to be allowed to rest. You can be exactly human, which means exhausted sometimes, confused sometimes, not okay in ways that don't fit neatly into a punchline. You can be that, right now, without it meaning anything catastrophic about your worth or your belonging or your right to take up space. Step off the stage. You have been on it long enough.